It's only natural for a religious person to be curious about atheism. I'd like to speak directly to religious people first for a little while. If you happen to believe in the existence of a God, then there is a difference between you and I. But this is really a small difference. Over the centuries and millennia, most people have been believing in thousands of gods. You don't believe in almost any of those gods, and I don't believe in any of them. I just believe in one less God than you do, and that's really a small difference. When a theist and an atheist come together to discuss the reasons for and against religious beliefs, they demonstrate their shared commitment to human intelligence. People who are committed to reason are proud to publicly share their humble efforts to understand reality and humanity's place in the world. This university, like every institution of higher learning, represents civilization's faith in the power of the human mind. All people who make up this university and every university, and people who come to speak at university events, display this respect for the human mind and show respect for the cooperative efforts of sincere people who pursue the truth together. This debate exemplifies this respect that the mind deserves. We are proud of this institution, and we are proud of you for being here to participate in this life of the mind. All right. An atheist. Who is an atheist? Dr. Craig gave us portions of his definition of what a theist is. He may have more to say on that score. I'm going to try to explain what an atheist is. An atheist is simply a person who demands good reasons for all beliefs and doesn't find the reasons given for any religion to be convincing. An atheist is therefore someone who lives without belief in a God. Atheists are happy to take responsibility for their lives. They wish they lived in a world where more people took that same responsibility. Atheists imagine a world to come in which people respectfully debate the reasons for and against belief in all these gods that are available. Today we live at a midway point between a time when only blind faith and priestly authority controlled religion and a future time when any remaining religious belief has been thoroughly examined and tested by reason and science. I do not yet know what sort of religious belief, if any, may survive that scrutiny. The process is hardly completed. This atheist keeps watch on the process and remains unconvinced by any religions offered so far. What does the atheist believe in, if not religion? The atheist is unable to accept supernaturalism, and therefore the atheist is a naturalist. Naturalism, as Dr. Craig mentioned, can be briefly defined as the belief that the only reality is the physical universe of energy and matter as gradually discovered by our intelligence using the tools of experience, reason, and science working together. Many people are naturalists because they are impressed with science's ability to produce reliable knowledge, and by deciding that the supernatural cannot be reasonably supported by experience, reason, or science. On the other hand, many supernaturalists remain comfortable with the supernatural because they've decided that naturalism, using experience, reason, and science, cannot prove supernaturalism false. Some supernaturalists additionally believe that scientific knowledge as well can be used to positively support belief in the supernatural. Theological defenses of supernaturalism sometimes appeal to reliable human knowledge about the natural world, and they try to formulate hypotheses about the supernatural that are harmoniously consistent with science's best theorizing about the natural world. Let me be clear about this point. In order to be a supernaturalist, it is hardly necessary to reject the existence of the natural world or to reject science's knowledge of it. In a sense, most religious people are naturalists too. They do believe in the existence of the natural world. They accept the evidence of common sense about the world, and they accept most or perhaps all of science's knowledge about the world. So what really divides the naturalist from the supernaturalist is the additional question of whether one should believe in the supernatural over and above the natural. To proceed from the natural world to the supernatural world, metaphorical bridges of theological reasoning such as we've heard some already from Dr. Craig, must be constructed and successfully crossed. The supernaturalist has the obligation to provide strong bridges. The naturalist, in response, argues that all of these bridges fail to be reasonably strong enough. The varieties of supernatural bridges fall into various categories. We've heard some tonight. But to defend naturalism and to reject supernaturalism, the naturalist has to explain why all of these bridges fail, because their arguments are too weak to support the passage to naturalism. Often the supernaturalist will construct many bridges, attempting to build up a good case for supernaturalism with numerous arguments. Now, if one of these bridges, just one, were reasonably strong enough, the supernaturalist would take the advantage over the naturalist, and then people ought to believe in both the natural and supernatural worlds. Since naturalists are skeptical that any of these bridges are strong enough, they conclude that there's no reasonable way to get to naturalism. The large number of weak theological bridges impress any naturalist. Okay? If you want to safely cross a deep mountain chasm, having a dozen flimsy bridges available to you should not make you more confident of your chances of getting safely across to the other side.
And one thing you also get by the logic of the faith at this moment is this death cult behavior that we're now all too familiar with. Suicide bombing of the most extraordinary and ceaseless kind. I mean, you can reliably turn to page 8 of the New York Times every day and discover that someone has blown up a mosque somewhere. First thing to point out is that no one suffers by this more than Muslims. I mean, they're Muslims getting killed by this. It's not Americans for the most part. This is a bombing in Pakistan where Sunni bombed a Shia procession. Now the Sunnis view the Shia as apostates, and bombing them makes sense. The core issue here is this notion of martyrdom. The notion that death in defense of the faith is the surest way to paradise. Okay, this belief is what makes sense of this behavior. Now I want to linger over this image for a minute, actually. This is a little girl, you can't quite see her in this lighting, but this little girl crouched over the corpse of her mother. And this is actually not the initial bombing. What they did is they bombed a procession of Shia pilgrims, and then they sent another suicide bomber to the hospital to wait for the ambulances to come in to blow up the casualties and the doctors and the nurses and the ambulance drivers. So this is a shot from outside the hospital. And just imagine this. I mean, just imagine what it was like for someone to come up with that idea. It's kind of creative in a truly diabolical way. Someone had to volunteer to be the suicide bomber. I mean, someone had to get up in the morning thinking this is the best use of his life, to blow up this little girl's mother. And I mean, this is, again, realize this is not collateral damage. This is the point of the exercise. In fact, by this logic, by the logic of this belief, it is impossible to kill the wrong people, because all the good Muslims you blow up are going to go to paradise, and they're going to thank you. All the bad Muslims, all the apostates and the infidels, are going to go to hell where they belong. It is impossible to screw this up. Okay. Now, just so you don't get the sense that I'm narrowly focused on Islam, I would point out that the moment you see the link between morality and human well-being, you can see that notions of right and wrong and good and evil that come to us from religion often break this connection. And that's what's so dangerous about religion. I mean, in the best case, religion gives people bad reasons to be good where good reasons are actually available. In the worst case, it just disregards human well-being entirely. So, for instance, the Catholic Church is simply more concerned about stopping contraception than stopping the rape of children. I mean, that is a fact about both the beliefs of this particular person, the use of his energy over the last several decades, and just the energy of the Church. If you know anything about the child rape scandal in the Catholic Church, it is mind-boggling the effort that was not spent to protect children and the effort that was spent on sheltering the rapists from secular justice. The Catholic Church is also more concerned, incidentally, about stopping gay marriage than stopping genocide. I mean, this is what its attention is on. Okay. This, when you realize that questions of right and wrong actually relate to questions of human well-being, this is not morality. This is not an alternate moral framework that we have to take seriously. The Catholic Church could talk about physics. It could say, well, we're actually interested in the physics of the transubstantiation, or the physics that allows the Holy Ghost to be here and there and everywhere all at once. But there's not a physicist alive who would have to take those utterances seriously. Okay, I'm saying that if you talk that way, you don't get invited back to the physics conference. What I'm saying is that the moment we admit that morality relates to human and animal well-being, you don't have to get invited back to the morality conference either.
Now, an atheist is a naturalist who is skeptical about supernaturalism. Atheism does not rest on proving that supernaturalism is false. This is key. Defenders of religion who construct hypotheses about God sometimes announce that these hypotheses cannot be proven false, so therefore they must be true. No, theologians who design their God so carefully that no actual evidence could ever disapprove it sometimes think their job is done. They seem to be saying, since you can't prove my God doesn't exist, you must admit my God does exist. Such theologians are making three basic logical errors. First, things can't exist just because we can't prove otherwise. An atheist is reasonable because no argument for supernaturalism is strong enough. The burden of proof about God is entirely on the theologian's shoulders. Second, hypotheses do not become more reasonable by adapting to fit all possible evidence. Science does not work that way, despite common misconceptions. Scientific hypotheses earn belief by correctly predicting future new evidence. A hypothesis that can survive any and all evidence makes evidence irrelevant, and so that hypothesis gains no support from any evidence. Third, lots of theologians can design their gods to be evidence-proof. If dozens or hundreds of different supernaturalisms are all claiming to be true in this way, can the atheist be blamed for refusing to accept any of them? In a weird sort of way, if all of them can claim to be true, none of them can be true. Now, when atheists are confronted by these sorts of overconfident theologians and their evidence-proof hypotheses about gods, atheists wonder what happened to good old-fashioned traditional theology. Where did the natural theology of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries go? 19th century theology confronted evolution and lost. Maybe 20th century theology lost its nerve too, and largely gave up on competing with science for explaining what is going on within the natural universe. Some 20th century theologians went to the extreme position that the most genuine faith is the one that endures despite being completely rationally absurd. Now, atheism can't reason or debate with that sort of irrationalism. Other 20th century theologians were chased out of nature, but they clung to the edges of the universe, claiming that only supernaturalism can account for the most general features of the universe and for the existence of the universe at all. Now, this kind of what I call theology at the edge at least offers arguments for God that can be rationally debated, and we've heard a couple tonight. However, such theology still makes no empirically testable predictions, but is simply happy to proceed from whatever science has established so far about nature. Theology at the edge can always keep its marginal place, no matter how far science advances, so long as it always adapts to stay compatible with all scientific knowledge. With the theologies at the edge permanently entrenched in the mysterious darkness beyond science's light, atheism will always have competition, and naturalism will always seem incomplete. Does the atheist deny that dark mysteries will always lurk beyond the known universe? Of course not. The atheist simply refuses to believe any speculative supernatural hypotheses, especially when they refuse to positively contribute to knowledge of how nature itself works. Some of Dr. Craig's arguments for God are good examples of how to do theology at the edge. Since theology at the edge is quite happy to admit that nature surely exists and that science can gain much knowledge about nature, the atheist tonight will not have to waste time establishing these facts. Of course, now there are some religions that view nature as only illusion and science as completely delusional, but we won't have to debate whether naturalism is delusional here tonight in this context. The question again is whether we should also accept supernaturalism in addition to believing in the existence of nature. The atheist position is that we should not. The darkness that surrounds our current knowledge is, for the atheist, just more unknown nature to be explored. That's the atheist's alternative conservative hypothesis. Can the atheist now prove that beyond the known natural world lies only more nature? No such proof is possible. Naturalism at the edge is more reasonable, not because it can be proven true or because supernaturalism can be proven false, but rather because we already placed some confidence in science's expanding knowledge, while little confidence can be placed in theology's shrinking retreat. Now just consider the heavy price that must be paid by a theology at the edge. What sort of God must this theologian like Dr. Craig design in order to survive at the fringes and margins of knowledge? Dr. Craig's God, for example, must exist in a timeless, eternal, unchanging state before creating the universe. According to Dr. Craig's argument that nature must have a definite beginning, nothing real could be infinitely long in duration. For Dr. Craig's God then to be real apart from the natural universe, God cannot exist in time before the natural universe exists. No time, therefore no change. And so Dr. Craig's God could not, for example, make any plans, think through ideas, or do anything while in this eternal state. Now, Dr. Craig complains that we cannot conceive of an infinite series of events. Now, Dr. Craig decides this because he says infinities contain contradictions. Now, mathematicians, in fact, actually define what infinite sets are in terms of such contradictions. No implications about reality follow from this at all, and mathematicians should not be consulted about reality. Okay? Now, Dr. Craig complains that we cannot conceive of an infinite series of events, right? Now perhaps, I'm trying to be a humble guy here, perhaps such an infinite is indeed beyond human imagination. But just because something's beyond current human imagination has no bearing on reality either. Reality is doing whatever it's doing regardless of whether or not we're able to conceive of it. We need to take a different tactic here. For example, is God's eternality any easier for our imaginations? Here, who really holds the advantage in this debate here? And Dr. Craig also tells us that this eternal, unchanging, perfect God is a person. I see no analogy, however, between living people who have to think through their actions and suffer through their experiences and a frozen, crystalline God who needs the natural universe in order to make a decision or change his mind or to learn what suffering is like. But all this is a problem for Dr. Craig to explain to ordinary Christians, not to this atheist. I don't care. I don't have a dog in this fight. I am only pointing out the extremes to which a theologian must go. Now here's another example. Dr. Craig likes debating naturalists who hold that all space, time, energy, and matter originated in the Big Bang. Dr. Craig wants us to apply the principle of sufficient reason, as it's traditionally called, demanding explanations for each and everything in order so that he can show that we need to hypothesize a supernatural explanation for nature. Now, it's inconvenient, therefore, for Dr. Craig to encounter other naturalists who do respect reason's demand for sufficient explanation. Now, when theology says, for example, that God's the one thing that needs no further explanation, naturalists wonder how nature itself got ruled out. What if nature is the Now, many cosmologists are designing, for example, natural explanations for the Big Bang, postulating more universe beyond the known visible universe, or even more universes, as Dr. Craig mentioned, multiverses and perhaps an infinite number. Now, Dr. Craig complains that no such hypotheses about multiple universes has been proven. We all realize that. Now, the atheist respects reason and admires adventurous scientists who push into the dark frontiers of nature, constantly expanding our conception of reality. Now, not so long ago, people believed that the Earth was at the center of a small starry sphere. Then our solar system became just a grain of sand in a vast galaxy. Then our galaxy just became one lost among a trillion more. Can we still be surprised that science might next cast our visible universe into a possibly infinite array of other universes? All we need as naturalists is to offer one speculative hypothesis to stand against the supernaturalist hypothesis. Neither of us can prove these to be true, neither of us can prove them to be false, but in a stalemate debate like that, the atheist wins because the more reasonable position is the conservative position. Stick with what you know. All right, now let me continue. I agree, our planet is special indeed. It appears designed for us, and evolution explains why. The universe, however, does not appear to be especially designed for life. The modern-day theologian of the edges doesn't really care either way anymore. If the naturalist points out that all sorts of other kinds of life could exist in universes where the laws of nature were different, the theologian says, no, our God wanted just this universe exactly, just what's best for us. And so this God is made immune from all evidence. If the naturalist goes the other way to complain about all of the obvious natural imperfections and natural evils of this harsh, hostile universe, the theologian then can twist around and say, no, our God wanted just this universe exactly, even if it doesn't seem best for us. And again, God is evidence proof. Theology at the edges needs to keep God in the dark and deep in mystery. The atheist doesn't want to live in the dark, finding it more reasonable to live in the light. Now I'm going to proceed very quickly in 3 minutes to give a brief outline of responses to Dr. Craig's arguments about morality, the biblical authority, and revelation. They're going to go by real fast, but I already told you at the beginning, in these opening statements, we're not going to be able to get in the nuts and bolts of what the other guy just said. There's going to be rebuttal time following, so stay tuned. This is going to go fast. Dr. Craig describes these objective moral values and truths as truths entirely independent from humanism, right? They are what they are, completely independent of what any or all of us think, humanity collectively. However, when he defines it that way, he begs the question. He defines morality in a way that already transcends us and appears to win the argument without any effort at all. Fallacy. We need to redefine some terms here. Let's mean by objective simply the opposite of subjective or dependent on just what you or me. Now, I agree in one sense that there are objective moral truths. I don't believe that there are any absolute moral truths. Dr. Craig was correct in quoting me accurately from my website, but you need to understand the distinction between objectivity and absolute, okay? Objective truths can still be true in a sense that is relative to humanity, but not to subjective personal whims. Take, for example, science. Science yields objective truths, but they're the result of our effort, and they may be revisable in the future. We should trust science's knowledge, even knowing that we humbly have to admit it might be corrected in the future by us humans. Absolute moral truths, on the other hand, completely transcend humanity. Now, I don't believe that any single religion can be trusted to tell us what these moral truths are. He mentions a few. I don't have any objection to them. I believe in them. Okay? So in my rebuttal, stay tuned for what more I have to say about the relationship between religion and morality. I claim that there are objective moral truths in the sense that we can all agree on them and ought to agree on them. They're not subjective, but they're not absolute either in the sense that Dr. Craig needs them to be to make his point. All right? A couple real quick words about his appeal to the Bible and to mysticism. Dr. Craig talks about the Bible as being an authority. What we need is other sources outside of the Bible. Dr. Craig doesn't cite any. He talks about personal experience. Well, Christians experience Jesus, Hindus experience Krishna. These things are culturally relative and have no bearing on what reality is ultimately like. Thank you for listening to my opening statement.
Why would one not see one's faith delusions as delusions? You can easily see other faiths as delusions. There are many reasons for this. We can take a look at cognitive neurosciences, psychology, philosophy. All right. But we'll pause and move to the second reason people have for claiming that their faith tradition is true. Conviction. Conviction. But conviction is evidence of nothing but conviction. Conviction is evidence of nothing but conviction. One's unshakable belief that one can see Christ or Zeus or the Emperor of Japan working in one's life is not evidence that the belief is true. This is evidence of nothing except the fact that one happens to believe whatever it is that one thinks one believes. This is part of the delusion. One's conviction is evidence of the strength of the delusion and not evidence for the truth of the delusion. Confidence does not map on to accuracy. Third reason, inerrant. Everyone thinks their particular faith tradition is inerrant. Inerrant, perfect, can't be improved upon. I want to take a moment right now to talk about this. Let's take a look at just a quick way that one can think critically about these things. Let's say I want to look at, are the prophecies in the Bible true? We already established that there are bad ways to do this and good ways. There are bad ways to think about problems. Here's a bad way to think about the problem. Go out and read only those books that already agree with the conclusions that you've come to. It's called confirmation bias. It's called confirmation bias. And as I read more and more about this in my career, I'm becoming convinced that this is an extremely important issue that needs to be dealt with. Here is a much better way to think about the problem. I want to figure out if the prophecies in the Bible are true. Here's what I should do. If you want to read someone who says the prophecies are true, that's fantastic. That's what you should do. Go out and read, I don't know, Josh McDowell, or take Josh McDowell. Go out and read Josh McDowell. Okay. But then people stop there. Don't stop there. That's just the beginning of what you need to do. The next thing you need to do is you need to read people on the other side, like Bart Ehrman or Richard Carrier or any of these people. You need to read people who have beliefs that don't agree with the conclusion that you started with. That's an investigation. That's what an inquiry is. But again, don't stop there. Don't stop there. Go back then to the original source material and see how Josh McDowell responded to those criticisms. Then you are engaged in a process of trying to find out what the truth is. That's a way to think about the problem. And I admit, it's a tremendous amount of intellectual work. It takes time, to be sure. No question about it. So where does this leave us? Where are we now? Well, there's an inevitable trajectory here. There's an inevitable trajectory. Almost every conversation, people want to talk to me about this constantly. This, and unfortunately not enough science fiction, but people want to talk to me about this constantly. Here's the trajectory of the conversation. Invariably, it starts off, my faith is true. After about, I don't know, depends on the person, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something really interesting will happen. The conversation will go from, my belief is true, and it won't be a clear demarcation. It won't be like an acknowledgement, well, you know, I guess I thought this, but it's not correct. No, from my faith is true, my belief is true, to my faith is beneficial. Well, my Uncle George plays poker with the guys at church and he likes it, or this is the inevitable trajectory of every single conversation. Period. But I'm sticking with my thesis tonight, and I am not going to allow the Q&A to be held hostage by people who want to do a fast trick and try to claim that it's beneficial. My thesis is that it's an unreliable process that will not lead you to the truth. But I have a prediction. I have actually two predictions for you. My first prediction is, in spite of me having spent like 3 minutes on this, people are still going to go up to the mic and tell me how it's benefited them. I have another prediction. That in spite of the fact that everybody knows my prediction ahead of time, it's not going to stop it. The most charitable thing that we can say about faith, the most charitable thing, is that it's likely to be false. Faith does not make you a better person. My lack of faith in Jesus does not make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a good person either. Your faith in Jesus does not make you a good person or a bad person. Faith does not make you a better person. Faith is just an unreliable process. That's all it is. This has nothing to do with being a better person or not. So what? Okay, so what? Where are we left now? Well, if you don't already use faith as a process to navigate reality, I have an incredibly simple piece of advice for you. It couldn't possibly be any simpler. When you do engage people of faith, be honest, blunt, direct, and truthful. Give them the same reciprocity in which they engage you. I always go out of my way to talk to the guy who screams or the people in the park. I think it's great. And they're always very honest with me, and I treat them with the same thing in kind. It's true. I also want to say that it's really important that you ought to model the behavior that you would like to see in others. Specifically the idea that you're willing to reconsider. I'm always open to think that someone knows something I don't know. If someone knows something I don't know, I want to know it because I want to lawfully align my beliefs with reality. But don't just stop there. Tell them about the advantages of reason and rationality. Don't leave them in the cold. Reason and evidence can replace faith. Reason and evidence can replace faith. If you have faith-based beliefs, thank you for coming. Tonight is an opportunity for you to jettison your faith. You can do that right here, right now. You can say no to faith. Whether it's something as simple as my bathroom door, or it's larger questions of ultimate concern. You can use a process that will increase the likelihood that you'll come to truth, that you'll have true beliefs. It's a process. Nobody's mad at you. Nobody's upset that you use a process to know reality that isn't reliable. It's not a matter of shame or blame. It's a matter of lawfully aligning your beliefs with reality by using a process that will take you there. Here's your first step. I mean, your first step on the journey tonight to leave your faith right here tonight. The first thing you need to do is to admit that there are things that you don't know. Even doing this will tremendously advance your epistemic situation. I don't know what happens to me after I die. I think my suspicion is that because the neurons in my brain stop firing, that there'll be no more me, just oblivion, just like before I was born. But I don't know that. As a skeptic, I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm open to evidence to the contrary. And to be sure, no question about it, it will be scary. No question about it. But there are community resources to help you. There are. There are. Nobody's left alone. There's the free thinkers of Portland State University who put on this talk. There are meetups. My friend Bernie is here. I saw him tonight. Where are you, Bernie? Raise your hand. Talk to Bernie at the end. There's the Center for Inquiry.net. There's Skeptics in the Pub. You can move beyond faith and replace it with a simple rule. Couldn't be any easier. I'm going to proportion my beliefs to the evidence. I'm going to proportion my beliefs to the evidence. Carl Sagan said it best. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It doesn't take faith to say, I don't know. It takes humility. If you want to align your beliefs with the truth and embrace reason, then you can say no. Tonight really is a genuine opportunity for you to live a life free of delusion. Thanks.
So my argument to you, really, and my argument in my book is that either you have good reasons for what you believe or you don't. If you have good reasons, your beliefs are part of the general purview of scientific rationality. You know, so we don't need to distinguish between hard science and soft science. This includes history. This includes all intellectual discourse where people honestly represent the state of the evidence and seek evidence. And religion is the only area of our lives where having no reasons or having very tenuous reasons is considered a boon, really. It's often considered even more ennobling to take this on faith rather than This is the parable of doubting Thomas. So having noticed this confrontation between religion and science, and faith and reason generally, many of us have become what is now called religious moderates. The religious moderation really is the flavor of religion that is acceptable to so many people who are otherwise rigorously honest in intellectual terms. In my book, I criticize religious moderation rather harshly, and this has actually been some of the most controversial material in my book, so I just want to run through my argument briefly about this because it has raised some hackles. The first thing to say up front is just that religious moderation is better than fundamentalism. There's no doubt about that. Religious moderates don't fly planes into buildings. Religious moderates don't organize their lives around apocalyptic prophecy, and that's a very good thing. But religious moderation has some real problems. The first is that it gives cover to fundamentalism. Because religious moderates have made it taboo to criticize faith. They want faith respected. They want the whole project of being religious, being identified as a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, to be respected. That it is impossible to call into question this basic project, the ethical tenability of raising a child to believe he's a Christian as opposed to anything else. And under the cover of this respect, we are now powerless to say the very harsh and necessary things about religious extremism that we need to say, because it is taboo. You have to respect faith. Religious moderation prevents us from even noticing the differences among our religions. It is taboo to notice that all our religions are not teaching the same thing. They're not all equally wise, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. I mean, where are the Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers? If you think for a moment that the kind of violence we see in the Muslim world is born of the Israeli occupation and our misadventures in Iraq, we should see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. The Tibetans have suffered an occupation every bit as brutal and far more cynical than any that we or the British or the Israelis have imposed upon the Muslim world. Something like 1 million, 1.2 million Tibetans have died since the Chinese occupation. Where are the throngs of Tibetans in the streets calling for the deaths of Chinese non-combatants? Where are the Tibetans blowing themselves up on Chinese buses, at weddings, in crowds of children, in front of the offices of the Red Cross and the UN? It's not happening. It's not likely to happen. It's not that you could not possibly form a death cult out of the principles of Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, to some degree, Zen Buddhism informed the worldview of the kamikaze pilots during World War II. But you would have to work very hard to bend the core principles of Buddhism into this kind of orgy of violence. You don't have to work so hard as a Muslim. And it would be impossible as a Jain. I mean, the Jains, this religion of India that has some 10 million subscribers, I think, the core of their religion is nonviolence. No matter how deranged you get by your doctrine as a Jain, you will get less and less violent. I mean, the really religious Jains cover their mouths with cheesecloths so they don't inhale a bug. By no stretch of the imagination can you argue that the core principle of Islam is nonviolence. It is taboo to notice this, and it is especially taboo among religious moderates. Our own religious demagogues will notice this. We can have, Franklin Graham will stand up and say, Islam is an evil religion. They'll notice the differences between religions. Everyone else has the wrong religion. But religious moderates have rendered this taboo. I want to point out that I'm not talking about a race or ethnicity. I'm talking about the consequences of ideas. When I talk about Islam, I'm talking about John Walker Lynn, the white guy from Marin County who went off to fight with the Taliban. We are at war, to digress briefly into our current situation. We are at war with Islamic fundamentalism. Not merely Al-Qaeda, not extremist Islam. The mainstream doctrine of Islam contains this notion of martyrdom and jihad. It contains this imperative to convert, subjugate, or kill infidels. Anyone who says it doesn't has not read the Quran, has not read the Hadith, or is lying about them. It is taboo to notice this. If you doubt this, if you think, I'm sure there are people in this room who are still thinking, no, it can't be religion. This is lack of economic opportunity. It's lack of educational opportunity in the Muslim world. Just contemplate for a moment the biographies of the 19 men who woke up on September 11th, 2001 and decided to slit the throats of stewardesses and fly planes into buildings. Okay, these guys were college educated to a man. Many of them had PhDs. Many of them had been educated in the West. They were middle class or better. I don't know how many architects and engineers need to hit the wall at 400 miles an hour for us to get it into our heads that this is not merely a problem of education or economics. These were not guys who had spent a lot of time agitating about regime change in the Middle East. These were guys who spent an inordinate amount of time at their local mosque in Hamburg talking about the pleasures that await martyrs in paradise and demonizing infidel culture. The circumstance we are in is much more sinister than many want to realize. It is possible to be so well educated that you can build a nuclear bomb and to still think you're going to get the 72 virgins in paradise.
Okay. So anyway, I was talking about how we're able to project ourselves elsewhere, like this sense of mind reading and so on. We do many other things too that I find incredibly interesting. That is, we're also able to sense presences in the room with us. Now, this happens under lots of different conditions. In my previous books, I've written about going to Michael Persinger's lab in Laurentian University in Sudbury, Canada, and putting the God helmet on. You can watch this on YouTube. And people that do this have an out-of-body experience, and they see aliens or whatever, angels. They experience a sense presence in the room. You're in a sensory deprivation room in one of these big easy chairs, and it's quiet and dark, and he bombards your temporal lobes with these solenoids, with electromagnetic fields. The temporal lobe is just ripe with being stimulated to produce angelic voices, the sense of God, anything like this. There's lots of examples of this now. Epileptic patients that get open brain surgery where they cut the corpus callosum to stop the spread of the seizures from one hemisphere to the other. Amazingly enough, these neuroscientists get their permission to wake them up in the middle of the surgery and poke around and ask them what's going on. And this is remarkable. They agree to do it, which I think is great. Good for science. And so that's how one way to map the brain. You just poke around with an electrode and say, now what's happening? Now what's happening? So, for example, there was an epileptic patient in 2002 who had this done, temporal lobe, little spot there, where she immediately floated out of her body. She had an out-of-body experience, and they ratcheted the electricity up, and she floated way up, and then they brought it back down. She floated back down, and they touched around, and her arm goes up, her leg goes up, and so forth. So they were able to map all this. Of course, she's just lying there. Nothing's actually happening. This is all in her head. She's talking about it, right? So we can reproduce these things through this helmet, through electrical stimulation. There's a guy named James Winery who works for the United States Air Force, maybe retired now. He used to accelerate pilots till they black out, part of their training. And a significant percentage of Winery's pilots had out-of-body experiences when they were in the process of blacking out. So this is hypoxia, oxygen deprivation to the cortex. As the blood gets squeezed to the center of your body and the center of your brain, then your cortex just begins to shut down. The visual cortex on the back just shuts down. May have something to do with this shutting down in this particular way. Maybe that creates a tunneling effect, or maybe a spiraling effect, and white light at the end of the tunnel, all those things. In other words, there's lots of different ways we can physically replicate. These are drug-free and legal, by the way. You can do it through sleep deprivation, too, is a really good one. And so as I began to research this, I discovered that, in fact, it's not just these artificial conditions. In fact, Lindbergh talked about having a sense presence in the cabin of the Spirit of St. Louis as he flew to Paris. This was only 36 hours of sleep deprivation. This is nothing. Every graduate student's done that. And he reports in his book, talking to them, and they were talking back to him. And Himalayan climbers, K2 climbers at high altitude, they often talk about the sense that somebody is on the rope next to me, talking to me, especially when they're alone. This mainly happens when you're alone. Now, okay, that's high altitude, so that might be oxygen deprivation. And Reinhold Messner talks about this in his accounts. He summited Everest, I think, 7 times without oxygen. This guy has a lot of experiences to write about. But it also happens to Arctic explorers and solo sailors. Sailors are at sea level. And when they're alone, they hallucinate that there's somebody else right there with them. And they talk to the imaginary friend, and the friend talks back. This is remarkable. The Iditarod dog sled mushers, they often talk about sense presences. There's somebody right there on the the sled, or on the side of the trail and this sort of thing. My own friends in Race Across America who go hours, days without sleep, they often report seeing people on the side of the road. I had these great hallucinations when I was racing Race Across America. The clusters of mailboxes in the Midwest, they become people that are like waving to you, because sometimes people do come out and wave to you. So you can never be sure if they were mailboxes or people, so you always wave back just in case. And of course, I've written many times about my own alien abduction experience after 83 hours without sleep, riding from Santa Monica Pier to Nebraska without stopping. And I wanted to see if I could go the whole 3,000 miles, 10 days without any sleep at all, because the record was 11 days. It was in 1983. And I read about this kid at UCLA who went 11 days without sleep. He was playing like pinball games and stuff like that. I can do it. Anyway, I couldn't do it. And nobody can do it. It turns out, because lots of people have tried in this race since then, and it turns out you just can't be that physically tired and go without the sleep. So, but nevertheless, you can have some really great drug-free legal hallucinations. All the product of just... well, we don't really know what. There's a lot of different theories about this, but this is a relatively new area of neuroscience that having to do with stress, perhaps, sleep deprivation, exhaustion, hunger. There's a whole variety of these extreme environments that produce these really strange effects. Okay, the point of all this is that to explain why we believe in God, gods, the afterlife, all these things, belief in things unseen is part of it. It's not that they're not true. Some things might be true. That's a separate question that I deal with elsewhere in the book. I'm just fascinated at this point why people believe those things at all, and that just becomes part of neuroscience as an explanation.
In his book, The God Illusion, Richard Dawkins writes the following famous sentence, man. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. And I couldn't agree more with that sentence, man, and in today's video I'll prove just how true that analysis is. And so, without further ado, let's jump right in and look at our first biblical verse. I don't know, I actually dropped the phone. Let me read you the verse. Version in question is 1 Timothy chapter 12 verses 12, which says, I do not permit a woman to cheat or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. I know the red pill crowd is already going, here we go again, this woke mind virus shit, blah blah blah, man. But please, stick around, man, and riddle me this. Why does God care which gender is in authority over the other? I'm genuinely interested in understanding, man. What is it that God placed within the male gender that is so superior and doesn't exist in or across the female gender? And if such a thing exists, why did he choose not to place it within the female gender as well if he is a fair God? It's either he wasn't powerful enough to do that, or he could, but he just enjoyed having one set of humanity constantly bending, or as he says, submitting to the will of the other set. After all, he is the same God that gives tips and tricks on how to best manage slavery across the Bible. But not a single time does he label it as a sin that society societies should rid themselves of. And I have even more proof to give credence to this theory. Periods, for example. God could have easily created women such that they didn't need to shed blood each month, just like most other mammals in the animal kingdom don't. But God made women the way he did and then went on to constantly describe them as unclean because they have the monthly periods. Take Leviticus chapter 15 verses 19 to 21 for example. I'll read it to you. Here the Bible says, when a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Just imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. God purposely creates you a certain way you had no input on, but then he goes on to shame you for it using some of the most disgraceful language the human mind can conceive. So to Christians, does this actually scream fairness, man? Are they really trying to tell us that this is the best that an all-knowing, all-caring, and all-powerful God could do, man? I don't know, but I'm not too stupid to believe that. And in fact, as I pointed out in last week's video, the way the Bible talks about women is the only proof that any of us need to confirm that it's purely out of a man's imagination and not the conception of any all-knowing, powerful being. Also worth noting, the first verse we looked at from 1 Timothy can be found in the New Testament. So can this next verse, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 18, which says, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. Can you imagine that, man? Even disciples of our Lord Jesus Christ couldn't bring themselves to call out slavery for the evil it is. But they dared to command slaves that they should submit themselves to all their masters, whether good and considerate or evil and harsh. That this is what God desires. And still Christians say God did not endorse slavery. He just wanted to best manage an already existing practice. Come on, man. And even if these verses weren't found in the New Testament, those Christians who usually claim that the evil and immoral laws detailed in the Old Testament are no longer in effect, they perhaps should read their Bibles over again, man. That's because all this, Jesus was the lamb sent to clear away the old rules and regulations. Misdirection is just that, man. Misdirection. And just another scapegoat that Christians usually use to ignore the atrocities and bizarre laws commanded by their all-loving and all-caring God throughout the Bible. And I can prove it. If anything, Jesus Christ was the biggest fan of the rules and regulations laid out in the Old Testament. First, let's take a look at what he says in Matthew chapter 5 verses 18 and 19. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Clearly, as stated here, the Old Testament is to be obeyed until the end of human existence itself, and none other than our Lord Jesus Christ claimed so. Some would like to claim that we might have taken the verse I just stated out of context, but I'm here to proactively dispel those rumors as well. Because a verse before the one we've looked at above, so we are talking about Matthew chapter 5 verse 17, which says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And in fact, this is not the only verse in the Bible where Jesus clearly and strongly approves of the Old Testament laws and prophets. In an entirely different book, Luke chapter 16 verses 17, the Bible says, it is easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of a pen to drop out of the law. You know, the regular shit, man. And if it is really true that Christians really think the Old Testament is null and void, why do they love it so much, man? Growing up, preachers would always, and I mean 90% of the time, would use stories laid out in the Old Testament during their sermons and preaching sessions. In fact, growing up, the coolest characters from the Bible I knew, if we take out Jesus because he is the central figure after all, All the other cool characters that we sang songs about and constantly heard about were from the Old Testament. Events like what God did in times of Noah or to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah were used to hammer in what God expected of us as humans and what we stood to lose if we defied his will. Surprisingly, however, when I started questioning the barbaric and disturbing verses within this same Old Testament, the believers around me were all of a sudden quick to claim they didn't matter and everything troublesome within them was nullified by the death of Jesus Christ. We all know this is just an attempt by Christians to manipulate the scriptures so they can assign a more acceptable and kinder nature to their, again, all caring and all loving God, man. Either way, man, let's keep up the good fight, ladies and gentlemen. Stay safe. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next video that I post the day after tomorrow, man. Peace.